Okay, thank you for joining me. We're on Masechet Sukkah still. Actually, we haven't got that much further to go before we have a grand seal of Masechet Sukkah. That will be really quite an occasion. But at the moment, we're on Daf Mem Vav Amud Aleph, 46a, Mem Vav Amud Aleph. I sent out a sheet, and if you're looking at your Gemara, then you'll find it there. It's about 2/3 of the way down. And I'll take you there in terms of where we're starting. We're starting 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. I think it's 7 lines above where the lines widen. The beginning of the line is V'chein Omer Rabbi Yitzchok. So if you can find that, it's about 7 lines above where the lines begin to widen out on the page. Okay, so actually, the piece of Gemara starts just after V'chein Omer Rabbi Yitzchok, V'af Rav Sova. So we're going to take it from there, from the Af Rav Sova. Just 1 second, I'm just going to close something that's disturbing me. Okay. And reopen, going my way. Okay, V'af Rav Sova. Let's just read that and then see what it's about. V'af Rav Sova, Kol Shiva Mitzvat Lulav. Rav also held that the mitzvah of Lulav and Arba Minim require a brocha all 7 days. We were talking here not about how long the mitzvah is, but whether you need to make a brocha every day. Do you remember we had all this discussion of the mitzvah of Sukkah and the mitzvah of Lulav? And there was a big machloket as to which one was a one-off brocha at the beginning and which one required a brocha every single day. Do you need to make a brocha every day you come into the sukkah, or is it enough to make a brocha on the first evening and that extends you all the way through? The Gemara explained the reason why it might suffice just to make it on the very first night, because the mitzvah is a continuous one that lasts through the day and the night, and therefore one bracha at the beginning is really all you need to take you all the way through, no matter how many times you come in and out of the sukkah. And then there was the question of lulav. Is that the same? Is that a mitzvah which you need to make a bracha every day because there is no mitzvah of lulav at night? It becomes separated by the night time. There's more of a savara, more reason to say you should make one every day. But there were arguments given this way and that way. And the Gemara is now saying that Af Rav Sava, Rav the Amora also is of the opinion, but Kol Shiva Mitzvat Lulav, that there is a mitzvah to make the bracha on the lulav all 7 days. Now, even though, according to this, the opinion we're referring to now, 6 days of the lulav bracha are midrabanan. Remember that the mitzvah min ha-Torah to take lulav and esrog was really only on day 1, l'kachtem mechem b'yom harishon, unless you're in the Beis HaMikdash when it was a 7-day mitzvah. But outside the Beis HaMikdash, and that's where we're really basing our discussion now, the mitzvah min ha-Torah to take lulav is day 1 only. So the 6 subsequent days, which we take lulav as well, are midrabanan. They're a sort of zeicha lemikdash. We commemorate the fact that there was once a mitzvah when the Beis HaMikdash was around to say it all 7 days. So we to take lulav and esrog all 7 days. So we do the same. But the 6 subsequent days are midrabanan. And the Gemara is now saying that Rav, even though he holds that the 6 subsequent days are rabbinic, nevertheless holds that there should be a bracha for those days as well. And this is to exclude the opinion which holds that you don't make a bracha on a rabbinic mitzvah. And if it's a rabbinic mitzvah, it doesn't require a bracha. So Rav is saying that even though only the first days min ha-Torah, days 2 to 7 also require a bracha, even though those days are rabbinic. That's the point that is being made over here. And this is where we get into the topic of making a bracha over rabbinic mitzvah. This really kicks off that general topic, which will take us outside that of the lulav from day 2 to 7. We will focus instead on Hanukkah, which is the classic mitzvah drabanan. So let's see how the Gemara works its way through to discuss Hanukkah. So Amar Rabbi Chia Bar Ashi, Amar Rav. Rabbi Chia Bar Ashi, the son of Rav, that said in the name of Rav. In other words, this is an expression of Rav's opinion. Hamadlik ner shel Chanukah tzorech levarech. Anyone who lights the Hanukkah candles needs to make a bracha. Now, of course, to us, it's no big deal because we always make a bracha on the Hanukkah candles. But here we're talking about the fundamental discussion about brachot. And since the whole mitzvah of Hanukkah candles is rabbinic, it's there to commemorate the nace that took place at the time of the Chashmonon. It's certainly not min HaTorah. It doesn't even find itself anywhere in Tanakh. The book of Maccabees is in the Apocrypha. Nevertheless, Rav says we do make a bracha, despite the fact it's rabbinic. And the Gemara means to say that since we see that Rav required a bracha to be made on the Hanukkah candles, even though it's rabbinic, and there might be an argument to say there should be no bracha, that you should light the candles without a bracha, he must also hold the same for the subsequent days of Sukkot, where taking of a lulav esrog is rabbinic. But as a parallel, those 6 days of taking lulav and esrog will also require a bracha, because he's laid down this rule from Hanukkah that a rabbinic mitzvah also requires a bracha, a bracha to be said in advance. So we make this parallel between the days of Hanukkah, which are all rabbinic, and the subsequent days of Sukkot for the purposes of lulav and esrog, which are also rabbinic. This is not extending to the mitzvah of sukkah, sitting in the sukkah, because the mitzvah of sitting in the sukkah is a 7-day min HaTorah mitzvah. However, the mitzvah of lulav, as we've seen, is only 1 day min HaTorah, the first day. Subsequent days are rabbinic. And we're seeing that Rav holds that any rabbinic mitzvah is entitled to a bracha to precede it. Why shouldn't it be entitled to a bracha? We'll see in a moment. You could say, well, why not make a bracha? Isn't it a nice thing to say? But a bracha is not a tefillah. You can't just invent a bracha, neither can you precede any action with a bracha just because you have a flight of fancy to make a bracha. That's not sufficient. You need to have grounds for making a bracha. And we'll see what are the grounds for making a bracha for a rabbinic mitzvah. Before we actually get into discuss that deeply, we're going to discuss some of the brachot that are said for Hanukkah when we light the menorah, which we already know about, but here we have the fundamental source texts for those brachot and the nusach that we use today. The Gemara now quotes Rabbi Yirmiyah. He makes the following statement: Rabbi Yirmiyah Amar, Roeh ner shel Chanukah tzorech levarech. Now, this is actually the only really surprising halacha at all in relation to Hanukkah, and it's one which we don't really keep today, at least not very much, very, very rarely. Rabbi Yirmiyah said, someone who sees the lights of a Hanukkah candle, and he sees it maybe in somebody else's house, he sees it through the window, he sees someone else's lighting a Hanukkah menorah, Chanukiah, in his chotzer, in his garden, tzorech levarech. The observer should make a bracha when he sees the lit candles, even if they were lit earlier on. He sees these lit candles, he can make a bracha. Now we'll see what the bracha is. The bracha the Gemara is going to explain. So we'll go and see what the bracha is. It's he can't say lahadlik ner shel Chanukah, because that bracha we make on the lighting of our own menorah. You've got to light a menorah, but he's observing a menorah here. So that won't be the bracha he makes. Let's go on and see how that works out. The Gemara says, "My mevorech." What are the brachas that people make over Hanukkah? This is really the manishtana, if you like, level of Neres Hanukkah and the halachot. What does he make? So Amar Rav Yehuda. So Rav Yehuda said, Yom HaRishon, the first day of Hanukkah, Hamadlik mevorech sholosh. The lighter makes 3 brachos, and we do as well. What are those? The Gemara will actually say, but we know what they are. Let me just share my screen. The classic 3 brachos that are made on day 1, and we release one of those on the subsequent days. You make Baruch Ata Hashem. I haven't shared my screen. I did something very naughty over here. I am going to share my screen. 1 second. Share screen. Okay. So the brachas over the Chanukah lighting, which we know well enough. Baruch atah Hashem Elokeinu melech haolam asher kiddushanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu lahadlik ner shel Chanukah. And with this we light the menorah. That's the lighting because it means to kindle. Lahadlik ner means to kindle. The second bracha of the three brachot you make on the first night is she'asa nisim. We also say this, in fact, every night. Baruch atah Hashem Elokeinu melech haolam she'asa nisim la'avoseinu b'yomim oheim b'zman hazeh. In other words, this bracha commemorates the miracle which the lighting of the menorah is supposed to remind us of. It's the miracle itself, the nisim that were performed for our forefathers. We make that bracha as number 2. And on the first night, we add the Shechianu, which is like we do when it's ever the first day of the festival. Something new comes our way, mizman lizman, from time to time, from season to season. And there's the bracha, Baruch atah Hashem Elokeinu melech haolam, shechionu v'kimonu v'higyonu lazman hazeh. So I've written out those three brachas. Let me just stop sharing. Okay, so that's on the first night. Yom Rishon, Hamadlik Mavorech Sholosh. Here the Gemara didn't say what those three are. Later on it specifies them. I've shared those three with you, and those are the three classic brachas that we make today. Says the Gemara, Haroeh Mavorech Shtayim. The one who sees the menorah lit by someone else. And by the way, I'm not talking about here a situation where you are sharing, you're eating with someone, and you're asking them to light the menorah, and you're going to be yotze. That's a very classic situation. This is not what the Gemara is talking about. The Gemara is talking about you walking home from shul, or walking out of the store at 8 o'clock in the evening, and you haven't lit your menorah yet, let's say. There's a machlokus exactly when this bracha might be said, this observational bracha. And as you're passing down the street, you see a lit menorah upstairs in an elevated position behind a glass pane. You see it, you should stand still and you should make your observational bracha. That menorah lighting has nothing to do with you. The host in that home has never seen you, doesn't know who you are, and is unaware that you're even observing his menorah. Yet, as an observer, you can make this bracha. What do you make? So on the first night, such a person who's just walking home from shul, and he observes somebody else's menorah, he says, Haroeh Mevorech Shtayim. He has to make 2 brachas. What are those 2? Well, one takes for granted he won't say lahadlik ner shel Chanukah, because that requires him to do his own hadlakah, his own lighting. So he makes the other 2. He says, she'asa nisim la'avoseinu b'yomim ha'heim b'zman hazeh. And he says, Baruch atah Hashem, etc., shehechiyonu v'kimonu v'higyonu lazman hazeh, if it is the first night. Okay. Mikam ve'elech, from the second day onwards of Chanukah, hamadlik mevorech shtayim, a person who's lighting his own menorah, says the 2 brachas that we make today. The only thing he misses out is shehechiyonu. So he's left with lahadlik ner, because he's lighting, and osanisim, which is the second bracha. And v'haroeh, someone who just happens to be coming home from shul, mevorech echat, he only makes 1 bracha, she'osanisim, because he doesn't shehechiyonu, because it's day 2. He's left only with 1. So that one he always misses out. The observer always misses out lahadlik ner, because that requires a physical action of kindling. And since he's not kindling his own light, he makes those, he only makes really she'osanisim, and if it's the first night, he says shehechiyonu. This is what the Gemara says over here. The Gemara actually goes on to say, umay mevorech, what is the bracha over lighting? And the answer is Baruch, etc., etc., etc. The Gemara misses out atah Hashem Elokeinu melech haolam, but it's to be assumed to be there. Asher kiddushanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivonu lahadlik ner shel Chanukah. That's the lighting bracha the Gemara is giving us over here, which we know. But after all, if you didn't have Gemara, you wouldn't know it either. So this is one of the classic source statements. So what are we seeing here? We're seeing that, first of all, the reason the Gemara is bringing this is simply to show you that Hanukkah is a mitzvah d'Rabbanan, the lighting of the candles, and yet there's a whole series of brachas, not even just one bracha. There can be up to 3 brachas that we say. Hey, why are we making a bracha? It's a mitzvah d'Rabbanan, from which we see that even on a mitzvah d'Rabbanan, it is possible to say a bracha, and the Gemara means to extrapolate that also to days 2 to 7 of Sukkot, where the mitzvah of taking lulav and esrog is only d'Rabbanan. Nevertheless, we can say the bracha of al netilat lulav will be taking the mitzvah, the lulav and esrog on days 2 to 7. Rabbinic mitzvot also are entitled to a bracha. That's the proof that we're trying to bring from here. The Gemara is now going to ask a very strident question, which is classic question. The Gemara says, "Veheichon tzivonu." How can a person? Okay, you're going to say that you've proven from here that in practice we do make a bracha on a rabbinical mitzvah from Hanukkah, and we're extrapolating that to Sukkot. But wait a moment, how can you make a bracha when the text of the bracha is being said and you're using it essentially to express a lie? The bracha says, Asher kidishanu b'mitzvosov v'tzivanu. Hashem commanded us through his mitzvot, v'tzivanu lahadlik ner shel Chanukah, we say, for example, or v'tzivanu al netilat lulav. Where is he mitzivanu? Is this not a lie? Is this not a statement which is sheker? If you take Hanukkah most classically, there is nowhere in the Torah that mentions anything to do with Hanukkah. And the menorah that the Kohen Gadol used to light in the Beis HaMikdash is absolutely nothing to do with this. It's no more than that was the original mitzvah at the time of the temple and the time of the Mishkan. This lighting the menorah commemorates the victory of the Maccabees over the Yevonim and doesn't come under that umbrella at all. So it's completely brand new. It is man-made. And how, therefore, can we have the chutzpah to make a bracha which says, Asher tzivonu, Hashem, you commanded us. It didn't command us at all. So the Gemara is going to have to examine that. How can we use a text which is a distortion of the facts? At least let's make a new text up. If you want to make a new text up, that's already going to be sufficient, but we don't. We use Asher Kidishon, you satisfied us with Tzivonu, and you commanded us to do the following, even though he never commanded us at all. Just before we do that, we'll look to see what the Gemara gives as a reason for making a bracha. Where did he command us to do something so that we are entitled to use this particular nusach in the bracha? I just wanted to pick up with you a question that Tosfos asks on the strange aspect of Hanukkah. Before we leave Hanukkah, this is nothing to do with Sukkah. This is the strange aspect of Hanukkah, that if a person observes a menorah being lit on his way home from shul, before he writes his own menorah, he can actually make this bracha, she'asa nisim la'avoseinu, on somebody else's lighting, even though that individual hasn't included him in the mitzvah at all. The first thing to note is that there's actually a machlokas. It's when you say this bracha. Most of us don't say this bracha at all because there's a machloket, and we don't make a bracha on something which is a little bit in doubt. The question really is, supposing the person is on his way home and he's going to light his own menorah at home. Does that really mean he's going to make the bracha of she'asa nisim twice? Once on his way home when he observes another person's menorah, again when he comes home and he lights his own menorah, that he will make lahadlik ner and she'asa nisim again? Really? Very unusual. Or does it mean that if he makes the bracha having observed it outside, he misses it out at home and just says lahadlik ner? Or does it mean that the only person who should make this observational bracha is someone who doesn't think he's got his own menorah? Since he hasn't got his own menorah to light, at the very least, he has the opportunity of making an observational bracha. So all this is discussed. And at the end of the day, because of all these discussions, we don't actually do this. At least I don't know people who on the way home make a bracha because they observed someone else's menorah being lit. But over here, it's brought in as being a bracha which is a valid bracha. Maybe we don't know exactly how to say it, but it is a valid bracha. if it's a valid bracha, Tosfos is not so interested as whether we do say it or we don't say it. But the last Tosfos on the page, if you look at it, this is the column on the left, which I haven't copied over to my my worksheet to share with you, but it's the bottom Tosfos. It says Horoeh on the left-hand column in Rashi print, Horoeh ner shel Chanukah tzorach levorech. That someone who sees the ner shel Chanukah should make a bracha, as we said, it's al hanisim. So Tosfos grapples with this, and he says, Bish'ar mitzvahs, for all other mitzvahs, kagon, al lulav, the sukkah, for example, on lulav and sukkah, lo takinu levarech leroeh. There is no mitzvah for an observer who's not actually doing the mitzvah himself to make a bracha. Ela gabi ner Chanukah, only in Chanukah. Why don't we say that every act of observation of someone doing a mitzvah entitles the observer to make a bracha in parallel to someone who can make a bracha because he observes somebody else light the candles or he observes a lit menorah. So I pass by in the street and I see someone making a bracha on their lulav and esrog. Maybe I should be entitled to make a bracha when I see them do that, even though I'm going to do my own. Or if I see someone move into the sukkah and sit down, maybe I should have a special bracha. You can look at all the other 248 assays in the Torah and say every time you observe a person do a mitzvah, make a bracha, not just on what you're doing, but on what the other guy's doing. We've never heard of this before. And yet when it comes to Ner Chanukah, it's here in the halacha. Observing a mitzvah happening entitles you to say a bracha. Where has this come from? That's what Tosfos is asking over here. So he gives an answer, Mishum chavivus hanes. It's a bit of a, I don't know, wishy-washy, you might say, soft answer. There's something special about the light of the Hanukkah candles. When you see the light of the Hanukkah candles, it brings to your mind so strongly the miracle that HaKadosh Baruch Hu performed for us in terms of the menorah at the time of the Hashmonaim and the battle and the victory of the weak over the strong, etc., and over the Yavonim, that we are drawn to it, and we have such love and passion for the mitzvah of Hanukkah. And to some extent we do. We know that even the non-religious people practice Hanukkah to some extent, even though they may not have the same kabbalot as we have. That Chazal instituted a bracha simply on observing it, because we get such a nachas from observing it. Now, when I see someone take a lulav and esrog in their hands, I probably think, well, they've got a lulav and esrog, I got a lulav and esrog. You know, there's hundreds and thousands of those, and it's not sparkling and lighting and flashing and twinkling in the eye. It doesn't bring to my mind a great victory over the Yavonim, etc. I don't have the same chavivut ha-mitzvah for most other mitzvot as I do over the Hanukkah candles. And therefore I don't make an observational bracha. Very interesting. That difference in passion that we have and commitment to the Hanukkah candles entitles an observer of that mitzvah to make a bracha of his own. Very big chiddush. And Tosfos is saying this is the reason why they instituted this special bracha over the observation of the Hanukkah menorah. He also goes on to say, "V'gam mishum sheyesh kama b'nei adam." Now, he's going to dismiss this second answer. V'gam mishum sheyesh kama b'nei adam. There are also many people she'ein lahem batim. They don't have a house of their own. Ve'ein biyodam l'kayim hamitzvah. This is reason 2 Tosfos is giving. He says, you don't like my answer about why the Hanukkah candles are special because of chavivut hamitzvah. I'll give you another answer. It's because what's the mitzvah of Hanukkah? It's called Ner Ishu Beso. Every person who has a house, he should light a Hanukkah candle in his own house. Now, of course, you can join on with someone else. I don't know who Tosfos is really talking about over here when he says there are some people who may be homeless, right? They live on a park bench. Maybe at that time it was more common. And because they live on a park bench in Gan Sacha, and they only have their own backpack, maybe they don't even have, there's nowhere for them to read to light a menorah. And because they don't have their own home to light a menorah, they won't be lighting the menorah. So therefore, Chazal said, you know what? Because that is, unfortunately, a situation we live in where there are many people who don't have the opportunity to do the mitzvot themselves, we will institute an observational bracha. So they at least get, if you like, some sense of doing the mitzvah by observing somebody else. And they will make a bracha, and they will feel, therefore, that they have somehow validated their Chag of Hanukkah. It's a very beautiful idea that maybe they won't have their own home, and this at least brings them into the mitzvah as an observer. Then he goes on to say, the Tosfos, the last line, the Tam Rishon Necha, he says that the first reason I gave, because of Chavivas HaMitzvah, is probably the better reason, rather than the one about not having a home. Because if, now I just won't read the last few words, Tosfos says that if it was all because, a lot of people don't have their own home, and therefore they may not have an opportunity to light their Hanukkah candle. Therefore, Chazal said, oh, we'll give you at least the bonus of an observational bracha. If that were the case, then I'll give you another mitzvah that a passerby, an observer, should say when he passes a home. That's mezuzah. If you don't have a home, let's say, then you can't put a mezuzah up. If you can't put a mezuzah up, you'll never have the mitzvah of, al mitzvah's mezuzah, the bracha of al mitzvah's mezuzah. That's a shame, isn't it? So therefore, because you might not have a home, there should have been an instituted bracha of Chazal, so that a person, listen to this, passing along the street, down Rehov Keren Kayemet, when he sees a mezuzah outside 27 Keren Kayemet, he should stand there and make a bracha. He doesn't have his own home with a mezuzah. He couldn't put up his own mezuzah. He never had a privilege of making that bracha. Let him at least have the bonus of an observational bracha. Yet we don't find an observational bracha for an observer of a mezuzah. Why not? If the reason that there's an observational bracha on the Hanukkah candles is because you may not have your own home, there should be an observational bracha on the mezuzah as well. Since we don't find that, it seems that it's not to do with whether you may or may not have a home. And therefore, Tosfos concludes the main reason is Chavivot HaMitzvah. Uniquely of all mitzvot, the Hanukkah candles deserve an observational bracha. And therefore they instituted this in order to, a person should be able to give, if you like, expression to the joy that he feels and he sees when he observes a Hanukkah-like burning in someone's garden or in someone's window. Okay, I've taken you over a little bit of a tangent over here because it's a most interesting topic, this idea of Haroeh, the Hanukkah candles burning. As I say, I'm not sure whether anybody else says it nowadays, but it's in, if you like, the archive of brachot, and therefore it was interesting to see why it was placed there. But the Gemara asked, going back to our Gemara again, the Gemara asked, "V'heichon tzivanu?" Where did HaKadosh Baruch Hu command us? How can we articulate the text of a bracha over a mitzvah drabanan, such as Hanukkah candles, and to say Asher tzivanu, that Hashem commanded us, when we know full well Hashem never commanded us with the Shabbos candles at all? Our rabbis instructed us. So the Gemara answers, Milo Sasur, from the posuk of Lo Sasur in Parshat Shoftim. So if I share my screen again, famous posuk. So the posuk is this: Al pi ha-Torah she'yerucha. The Torah says that in accordance with the Torah, with the laws asher yerucha, which they will teach you. Who's they? The sages. But al ha-mishpat asher yomelucha, and according to the ruling that they say to you, they hand down. Ta'aseh, you shall do. You shall follow their instructions. Lo sasur min hadova asher yagidu lecha yamin u'smol. Do not depart or deviate, it says in the translation here, from the matter that they tell you to do, neither to the right nor to the left. Famous posuk that has lots of drashot on it as well. In other words, lo sasur means do not deviate. It's al pi ha-Torah she'yerucha, and we're here talking about the sages. And if we imagine we're talking here about the Sanhedrin or some based in Agodol, there's a lot of discussion as to which sages. right? If I have a Reform rabbi somewhere in Chicago who says something to me, do I have to follow what he has to say? How do I know which sages? Now, that's a huge problem. But let's assume we understand which sages we're talking about. And at this stage, we're talking in our discussion of Gemara, not about individual sages, but Chazal back in Talmudic times and back all the way to Maccabean times. So we're going to take them as being authoritative sages. We have to follow what they say, and we're not allowed to depart from what they say to us. Therefore, the Gemara says, these are the grounds for us saying in our pre-bracha on a rabbinic mitzvah, Asher kidishanu b'mitzvoso b'tzivanu. We are about to perform a mitzvah you've commanded us. Where did you command us? You didn't command us to do the mitzvah, but you commanded us to follow the instructions of the sages. That's Asher tzivanu. So that's the classic answer, which is given here in the Gemara. So we see that following the command of the sages, which include, shall we say, Hanukkah candles, which are rabbinic, is essentially the fulfillment of a mitzvah min ha-Torah, because the Torah says, listen to what they say. And that entitles us to use the words Asher tzivanu. You have commanded us. You've commanded us to listen and to obey. That's what the Gemara says. Let's just go on one further before we discuss this, because this leads to some very deep discussions over the meaning of mitzvot. But just before we go into those deeper discussions, the Gemara brings another pasuk which we might choose instead as a source, if you didn't want to bring Lo Sasor. That's Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak Omar. Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak, the sage, the Amora, said, the pasuk which I would bring, he says, to prove that we have to follow the instructions of the sages, and which will entitle us to make the bracha Asher tzivanu. They have commanded us, we have to follow, is the following. Zachar, well, it's from Ha'azino, very famous pasuk. Zachar Yemos Olam, remember the days of yore, Y-O-R-E, if you like. Binu shnos dor. Understand the years of every generation. This is a statement that says we've got to go to Rabbi Wein's Destiny History Shiurim, right? Remember the days of old. Understand the events in every generation. Unless you know Jewish history, how can you actually do that? But that's not the bit we're interested in. It's the next half passage. Sha'al avicha v'yagetecha. Ask your father, and he will tell it to you. In other words, he will give you the tradition of what was passed down to him from his father and from his father, so on, the Masoris. Zekeinecha, your elders, I've highlighted that, and ask or follow your elders and whatever they will say to you, your elders who will tell you. Actually, this is a bit far-fetched to use as a proof, but let's just see how the proof emerges from here. I think it's coming from Zekeinecha, the Yomruloch. What is a Zakein? Zakanim, we talk about the Zakanim as being the elders. Sometimes the Sanhedrin are referred to as the Zakanim. Talmidei Chachamim referred to as Zakanim, the elders. It's like, going back to Western films, the elders of the tribe. The elders of the tribe weren't just people who were older than other people. They had, if you like, the accumulated wisdom of all their youth, all their years, the traditions that were passed down to them. So Zakanecha represents Chazal, really. Follow Chazal, the Yomruloch, and they will tell you what to do. If they tell you to light the Hanukkah menorah, even though it is only their prescription, not in the Torah, you may well say, because this pasuk here in Ha'azinu says that we have to follow whatever the Yomruloch, whatever they will say to you. If I were to choose which of the two psukim is more core to the message of a rabbinic mitzvah being essentially close to mandated by the Torah, it would be this first one. Lo so it's much more direct. Don't deviate from whatever Chazal say. This Zekeinech v'Yomruloch is much more subtle. Nevertheless, Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak says that this is the verse from which we might wish to derive. We might wish to derive the requirement to make a bracha of Asher Kidishan Mitzvah Tzivanu even before a rabbinic mitzvah. Now we have a little bit of a problem that emerges from all this Gemara, because we should be scratching our heads. Before we get to the Rambam, we should already be scratching our heads. What are we saying now? And we've got two proofs for this, that a rabbinic mitzvah, in some senses, carries the force of a Torah mitzvah. And that's what we express in our bracha. We say Asher Tzivonu, that HaKadosh Baruch Hu commanded us. And the Pasuk says, whatever they say, you're not allowed to depart to the right or the left. That mandates us to follow a mitzvah drabanan. Now we know full well that there are two categories of mitzvot. There's mitzvah drabanan and there's mitzvot doraita, mitzvahs haTorah. And they're two separate categories, classically separated by lots of distinctions in the Gemara. There are Torah mitzvahs and there are rabbinic mitzvahs. They're in two separate folders. And there are different laws that apply to them both. And the most classic difference is that when it comes to a safek in a Torah mitzvah, we go l'chumra. We always rule severely. In other words, we go for the more severe possibility. And if it requires us to do the mitzvah again, we do it again. If it means we shouldn't, we shouldn't. We always go severely. It often means that we follow the more severe view. When it comes to a safek in a drabanan, it's the opposite. Safek drabanan lahakel. We always we go lahakel. We follow the lighter, less strict view because it's rabbinic. So safek d'oraisa l'chumra, we're machmir. Safek drabanan l'kula. On a rabbinic matter of doubt, we actually follow the more lenient possibility. And classically, it might come out, for example, we say that there's only one real bracha, which is min haTorah, and that is benching. V'achalta v'zavata v'rachta is where the Torah mandates us to say grace after meals, if you like. So if you're not sure after you've eaten whether you benched or not, that can happen sometimes. You're at the table an hour later, you don't remember whether you benched, especially if you don't have anyone else at the table. Safek d'oraisa l'chumra. Since the bracha of benching is Torah mandated, you have to say it again. You have to do the bracha. You may have said it, but you don't know. And since it's a safek, you have to repeat it or say it again, maybe your first time, you don't know. When it comes to another bracha, let's say you just about to take a bite from an apple and you make berei priyetz, or maybe you don't know whether you've made berei priyetz. You're just about to bite into it and you're not sure. Your mind was distracted. Did I just say berei priyetz or not? You don't say it. Why? Because it's safek drabon. The bracha is only a rabbinic bracha, and therefore you are makel. You don't say it again. So you've got to know what is d'oraisa, what is drabonon. All through Shas, there is a distinction between d'oraisa and drabonon in terms of preferences, in terms of how they carried out, in terms of penalties, all the way through. It's the most classic distinction. So what are we now saying? Are we really saying that that distinction doesn't exist at all? Have we fudged it? We're now saying that a rabbinic mitzvah carries the force of lo sasur, which is a pasuk min haTorah, and allows us to say Asher Tzivonu, which expresses the fact that Kadosh Baruch Hu commands us to do it. If we commanded to do it because we're commanded to follow the sages who prescribed it for us, shall we say lighting the menorah, maybe all of a sudden lighting the menorah is a Torah mitzvah. Maybe everything we always thought was a rabbinic mitzvah is min haTorah. Now that can't be. So is it min haTorah because of lo sasur, or does it remain rabbinic? And if it's not min haTorah, how can you say Asher Tzivonu? We just said you can say Asher Tzivonu. This is a crisis. Let's see how the Rambam deals with it. Take you with a Rambam. The Rambam makes the problem worse, I can only say. Others try to solve it. Says the Rambam, this is from his Mishnah Torah, Hilchos Mamrim. He talks about the halachas of sages following the words, following the instructions of the Sanhedrin. So he says, Echad Dvarim Shalom Do Osanu Pia Shemua. Both matters which have been passed down to us from Sinai, or Vehem Torah Shabal Peh. Now he's saying he's referring to different types of mitzvahs, which are Torah Shabal Peh. They're mitzvahs min haTorah, but they're Torah Shabal Peh. In other words, they're not written directly; they're a tradition. Like we know for example, we know what an esrog is. The Torah doesn't give us a photograph of an esrog, but we know. But they're part and parcel of the mitzvah we say min haTorah. For echad devarim shalimdu mipi daton. Also, mitzvahs which the Chazal themselves taught through their own intellect. And maybe using one of the 13 hermeneutical principles. And the Chachamim believe it is appropriate to do the following mitzvah or whatever. Also, the gezeras they made, those sorts of things they said we shouldn't do as precautions to build a fence around the Torah. For example, muktzah on Shabbos is a siyag. There's nothing, the Torah doesn't say you're not allowed to move certain things if you're not going to use them. And yet we don't, because we say that is a gezerah Chazal made to keep us away from impinging on a real Aveira, but it's rabbinic. Whatever the time needs in every generation, Chazal make takonot and gezerot that befit the needs of that generation. Even minhagim. In other words, it's encompassed virtually everything you can ever think of in terms of the halacha, whether it's minat Torah or midrabanan. Every one of these three categories, mitzvahs asay lishmor lehem. There is a mitzvah asay lishmor lehem. Over al kol echad mehen over below saseh. Anyone who transgresses them transgresses over a lo saseh, which again seems to, if you like, fortify the position that if a person violates a rabbinic mitzvah, it's almost as if he violated a Torah mitzvah. So we fudge them again. How can we fudge them? So in terms of this, a lot of discussion, as a machlok is on this between the Rambam and the Ramban, Maimonides and Nachmanides. Nachmanides doesn't have this, doesn't want to hold on this at all. He goes back and makes a major distinction between Rabbanon and Minhat Torah mitzvahs, despite the fact that we've got this posuk of lo sasor that seems to sort of muddle them all in, as if a Rabbanon has the force of Minhat Torah. And it's very clear that the opinion of all of the Rishonim, and probably that of the Rambam as well, if you were to get into deep discussion with him, is that the categories Minhat Torah and Midrabanon are real. And something which is Drabanon is not Minhat Torah, and it's not Torah mandated. Nevertheless, because there is a mitzvah to listen to the Chachamim, that we're entitled to make a bracha of Asher Tzivonu, but that doesn't necessarily bring them into a single bucket with Minhat Torah. And this is something we might think is sensible. You can't say something midrabon is Minhat Torah. However, you can say that we're mandated Minhat Torah to treat it seriously, and therefore we can even say Asher Kiddushan Mitzvot Sovit Tzivonu and make a bracha on it. But it's not, in no way can it be mixed up together with a Minhat Torah to say they're all one block now. They're two very, very different blocks. I saw the Torah Tamima actually brings a very neat little original proof that must be the case, even from this Gemara, that the Gemara doesn't intend you to take this posuk of lo sasur too seriously as proving that a mitzvah midrabon is really as if it were Minhat Torah. And you know how he proves it? It's very interesting. He says, and I explained to you the second pasuk. This second pasuk over here, that was the alternative proof text that you should listen to the words of Chazal, because it says the So says the Torah Tamima, if you look at this pasuk here, which is brought by Rav Nachman by Yitzchak, it strikes you, if you're used to Gemara quotes from Psukim, extracts of Psukim, that this is probably an asmachta, a guzma, an exaggeration. It's a pasuk which is being used to back up something which needs to be known, not as a source text for a new formal idea, for a new formal halacha. It's too wishy-washy. Look, if I read Sha'al Avicha v'yagedecha, what I get from here really is, don't think things are bubba mices. That's all it's saying. If your father tells you something, take it seriously. If your grandfather's a keinecha, if your earlier generations tell you things, also take it seriously. And it equates to the first part over here. Zachar Yamos Olam, remember the days of old, Binu Shnos Dar Badar. Take heed of the lessons that emerge from every year and every generation in the past. What has that got to do with following Chazal when they prescribe a new mitzvah? It's pretty much a leap, isn't it? It was Rabbi Nachman bar Yitzchak's leap to use this as an alternative text. So, says the Torah Tamima, by looking at the second verse, you see that the verses are not to be taken as formal proofs that a Rabbanon is to be treated as if it were Minhag Torah. Because this second verse, I cannot take seriously as a formal proof. It's true that this first verse is actually more convincing, but says the Torah Tamima, given that the Gemara brings both of these proofs side by side, suggests that the Gemara doesn't intend it as a formal text proof, that a midoraisa, that Rabbanon almost carries the same weight as a Minhag Torah. No, the Gemara is trying to prove a point, really, only in relation to the bracha. As far as the bracha is concerned, you're saying you can't make a bracha on a rabbinic mitzvah and to pronounce the words Asher Tzivanu, Asher Kiddusham Mitzvah V'Tzivanu. I say you can say V'Tzivanu because you can see that in terms of the fact that we have to take heed of what our sages say, and the Torah makes this explicit, there's an element, if you like, of Minhag Torah in it, sufficient for us to be able to say Asher Tzivanu. Okay, let me stop sharing over here. 1 second. Where am I? Okay, that was that round button. Okay, so let's go back to our Gemara. The Gemara says, have you got this in brackets? I'm not even sure. Ma'ama'et in different Gemaras. Some, I imagine you have got it. It's in there. It's actually in parentheses. Ma'ama'et Zman. The Gemara wants to know which bracha do you leave out on the subsequent days. We said that you make 2 brachas on day 2 onwards, and 1 and 3 on the first day. Which one do you leave out? Zaman. You leave out. Zaman always refers to Shechianu. You don't say Shechianu other than on the first day of these mitzvahs. How do we know Zaman means Shechianu? Why doesn't it say Shechianu? Because Shechianu v'kimanu v'gyanu lazman hazer. So it's short as a reference to Shechianu. That's the one you don't say. If you're lighting Hanukkah candles, you leave that out on day 2 onwards. You say instead, you say Al Hanisim, and you say Lahadlik, but you don't say Shechianu. But the Gemara says, how do I know that you miss out Shechianu? We know we miss out Shechianu. Says the Gemara, how do we know fundamentally at source that you miss out Shechianu? Maybe Amar Nes, maybe you should miss out Al Hanisim. I don't know why the Gemara thinks you should miss out on Hanisim. The Gemara is saying, if I'm going to drop a bracha, we learned before that on day 2 onwards, there's only 2 brachas. On day 1, there's 3. The actual source text didn't say which one of the 3 you drop. I showed you which one you drop, only because I shared a screen with you, but the Gemara didn't. So the Gemara is now saying maybe the bracha I drop after day 1 is not Shechianu. Maybe I should say Shechianu every day, but I should miss out She'asa Nisim La'avosenu by Yomim Ha'hem Bazman Hazeh. Who says that I miss out Shechianu? And the Gemara answers really the most obvious answer. No, don't be silly. Isn't it more reasonable to miss out Shechianu? Nes kol yoma isay. The nes is a nes that happens every day. I think the Gemara is trying to say over here that if you remember the Hanukkah story, the light burned for 7 days, for the full period of 8 days, not just 1. So it turns out that all the subsequent days were miracles because it should all have burnt out from day 1. And so since the nes carries on to allow that small amount of oil to burn through the whole 8-day period, it is a continuous nes. How can you stop saying Al Hanisim after day 1? That wouldn't make sense. So you say it all the way through. That's what the Gemara means to say over here. You say it all the way through because it's an 8-day nes. It wasn't a 1-night wonder. It was an 8-day nes. And therefore, you have to say Al Hanisim. But you miss one out. Which one I'm going to miss out? Shechianu. Shechianu, as I said, it's a bracha you make when you come across a mitzvah or some occasion. And the first time you do the mitzvah, whether it's you're sitting on sukkah the first night, whether it's taking lulav and esrog on the first day, whether it's lighting the first night's Hanukkah candles, is where your real excitement is. And you say, HaKadosh Baruch Hu, thank you for bringing me to the Hanukkah season yet again. It's been a whole year since I've met you, my Hanukkah. I'm happy to meet you again. And that's really when you first, it's like when you meet a friend you haven't seen for a year, right? You embrace them and you ask how they are, etc. If you see them the next day, you don't go through that process again, right? That refreshment that you felt when you've seen them, that invigoration was really the first time you see them after a period. And therefore the Shechianu is only made on day one. Okay. The Gemara now brings Rav Nachman by Yitzchak. Rav Nachman by Yitzchak just makes an additional point of clarity. Masni lo behedya. Rav Nachman by Yitzchak taught Rav's statement explicitly. What did he say? Amar Rav kol shiva mitzvahs lulav. Gone back to lulav. The mitzvah of lulav, you make the bracha on all 7 days. We said before, af Rav Saba, that's how we came in. Rav holds that you always have to make the bracha all 7 days. The first day is Minhag Torah, and even though the subsequent days are rabbinic, you have to make a bracha all 7 days. But we didn't actually quote Rav as having said that. We said that Rav also holds the same, and then we brought his opinion, Rav's opinion on menorah, on Hanukkah, and then we made this read across, and we said just as he holds you make a bracha all the time on a rabbinical mitzvah, so also he would hold that you make the bracha on the lulav from days 2 to 7, even though they're rabbinic. You'd hold that as well. He would hold that as well. Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak is saying that it's not just the fact that we put 2 and 2 together as to what Rav's opinion was. Rav actually stated this. This is like a quote. He said, Kol Shiva mitzvah, you make the bracha on the lulav all 7 days. And for the reasons we said, that even though it's rabbinic, since we're told by the rabbis we need to follow the gezeres, the takanot, the mitzvahs that we're given by the Torah tells us we have to follow the mitzvahs given to us by the Torah. It carries at least as much force needed to be able to make a bracha, to say Asher Gidishanu b'mitzvosav v'tzivana. Okay, we've gone through that discussion, and that discussion brought us into the generalities of mitzvahs d'Rabbanan and how you can make a bracha. The Gemara is now going to the topic of making a bracha on Sukkah, not the bracha on the lulav, on the esrog, not the bracha on tefillin. We talked about that last week. We've gone through a number of diversions. We're not talking about the bracha now of Hanukkah. We're talking about the Sukkah. We tend to ramble in the Gemara, right? So we're getting back through our ramble to Sukkah. So Tana Rabbanan, our rabbis taught, Ha'osa Sukkah la'atzmo, someone who makes a sukkah for himself. He's building the sukkah, right? He's not sitting in the sukkah. He's doing this a week and a half before Sukkot. Omer, he makes a bracha. And what does he say? Baruch Shechianu, etc. This is going to be a brisa that gives us the halachas of bracha at different stages of sukkah, just as we did for Hanukkah, etc. But it's not the halacha we have today. Remember, we don't make a bracha Shechianu on building the sukkah. Maybe we'll see why not as we go through. As we go through the Gemara, we see that proposals are made, not all of which have come through to current halacha today. Sometimes there's a reason for it, sometimes it's because there's a differing opinion, which goes against the one that we express now. But this first opinion in the Brisa is that you make a shechianu when you're building. You're taking your hammer and your nails and you're knocking in, well, maybe you shouldn't be taking your hammer and your nails. You're taking your schach and you're rolling it up over the top of your sukkah frame. Then you should stop for a moment, put your hands over your eyes and say the bracha of shechianu. Okay. Va'usa sukkah latzmo, oma shechianu, etc. Nichlas leishepah. We move on now to the next bracha. It's in the first night of Yom Tov. You've come in to sit in the sukkah, Omer. Then he should make the bracha, Baruch, Ato Hashem Elokeinu v'Olam, Asher Kiddushanu, etc., etc. Leishev by sukkah. Again, the Gemara is very, very curt over here. It doesn't give us the full quote. But then you say Leishev by sukkah because you've got to sit in the sukkah. This is the first night of sukkah. You say Leishev by sukkah. Does it say you say Shechianu? Again, we make a bracha shechionu on the first night of Sukkah. We make leishef sukkah and shechionu on the first night. And over here, this brisa doesn't say shechionu. Why? Because it said shechionu on the building of the sukkah. So this is not what we do. Here, according to this brisa, the shechionu is brought forward to the building of the sukkah to cover the mitzvah of sukkah. So when you sit in the sukkah on the first night, you only have to make one bracha, leishef sukkah. Not what we do, but the source quote that we have here in the brisa. Excuse me. Says the Gemara, Hoy and the brisa, Hoysa asuya v'omedes. What happens? Let's go back again to someone who's it's a week before Sukkot, but he's already got his sukkah standing from last year. So he's not going to rebuild his sukkah. Yeah. And he looks at his sukkah and it's perfect. And he can able to move straight into the sukkah. So someone who has a sukkah which is asuya v'omedes, which means it's been made and it is standing. It's in fully standing order. So he can't make shechionu now on the sukkah at the time of building, because there is no time of building. What does he do? If he's able to do some shiputzim, if you like, to the sukkah, if he can do some refreshing to the sukkah, if he can rebuild part of it, if he can redecorate it or whatever, then he should do so, and then he can make his shechionu on that. You see, you can make a shechionu on that. So your guy's got a sukkah standing, but he says to himself, I want to make a shechionu because it's come again. I make a shechionu when I originally built the sukkah. Why should I lose it again this year? It's a week before Sukkot, and I don't know what I should do. Well, he should do something. Let him lift up the schach at one end, flap it around and put it down. Yes, let him remove a wall. Let him even put up new, perhaps lights or something that refreshes the sukkah in some way. And then he can make shechionu on that refreshment. And he's still got the possibility of making shechionu. In love, says the brisa, if there's nothing he can do to refresh it, I find this a bit strange. He's got the most high class sukkah in the world. It already has chandeliers and gold knobs. And literally anything he will do now will make it look worse. So he can't do anything to refresh his sukkah. How's he going to make a shechionu? Says the brisa, this is what we do. He doesn't make a shechionu at all at the time the sukkah is being made. He waits until the first night of Sukkot, and when he sits down in the sukkah, he makes his bracha, leishef sukkah and shechionu, just like we do. This is what we do, standard. And the brisa says you only do it if you couldn't find any way to build a sukkah or to refresh the sukkah you're already in, right? So the brisa is not according to our way of leading the halacha. Second, okay, let's just go on a little bit now, because the Gemara brings a related halacha. Amar Ravashi. Ravashi said, Chazina leila Rav Kana. I once observed Rav Kana, who was the generation before him of Amoraim, the Kahamalahu Lakulhu Akasa de Kedusha. He said all those brachas together in the Kiddush on the first night, which is what we do. Rav Kahana never, even though when he was making a sukkah, he didn't go like the brisa. He didn't do what the brisa said. He didn't make any bracha of shechionu when he built the sukkah, even though he was building a sukkah. He waited, as we do, until we move into the sukkah. And then when we say our shechionu, when we sit down in the sukkah, that shechionu actually covers two things. It covers the new yontif that comes in, which you normally make a shechionu anyway for, and it covers the building of the sukkah. So essentially that shechionu is in relation also to the past event of building the sukkah. And you do it all on your kosher kiddush on the first night, as we do. And so Rav Kahana is the halacha that has come round to us today. Not to say the bracha at an earlier phase when you were building the sukkah, but rather to leave it later on. There's just a little bit of a problem here with the Brisa itself, not with Rav Kahana. Rav Kahana makes good sense. As I said to you a moment ago, normally we say a Shechianu even on, and whatever we do, when we say Kiddush on the first night of Pesach, we also say Shechianu. The Shechianu we say isn't necessarily to do with a new mitzvah, it's to bring in the new day. We're so happy that Pesach has come along, that Sukkot has come along, the Rosh Hashanah has come along, whatever it is, we make that bracha Shechianu. It's not for a firm physical action. It's simply to invite the new Yom Tov coming in. So Tosfos asks a kasha elsewhere. He says, I can't understand, therefore, what the Brisa said earlier on. The Brisa said that if you have built your sukkah, you build a sukkah, you make Shechianu on the building, and then on the first night, you don't have to say the Shechianu again. You just say Leishet, because you said it already on the building. Tosfos says, well, what good is that? It may be fine that you said it on the building, but surely you need to say it again when Yom Tov comes in anyway, because the Shechianu has another reason. It's not just building the sukkah. The Shechianu has a reason that now the Yom Tov has come in. 40 minutes ago, Yom Tov comes in. I have to say a Shechianu. If I'm lighting the Yom Tov candles, I might also sometimes say a Shechianu. It's not because I'm doing a mitzvah to do with that specific Yom Tov, like building the sukkah. Yom Tov comes in, you say Shechianu. The guy doesn't say a Shechianu according to the Brisa. If he said it already a week and a half earlier on the Sukkah, he goes straight to Neshav HaSukkah. So where has he made his Shechianu for Yom Tov coming in? Anyway, so there's some discussion over that. It's strange to say that the Shechianu you say when you build the Sukkah a few days earlier will cover you for the Yom Tov coming in later on. So that's a bit of a problem in the Brisa. As far as we're concerned, we do what Rav Kahana has done, everything's fine. Because when we make our Shechianu, it's always on the first night, it's on the Yom Tov itself, and it's also for the building of the sukkah. So we'll stop over here. A second, let me quit recording. I can find the recording.